US Vice President Kamala Harris has made her first public appearance since beginning her bid to win the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. At an event at the White House, she praised President Biden's achievements and talked about her professional relationship with his son.
Joe Biden's legacy of accomplishment over the past 3 years is unmatched in modern history. In one term, he has already, yes, you may clap. In one term, he has already surpassed the legacy of most presidents who have served 2 terms in office. And I first came to know President Biden through his son, Beau. We worked together as attorneys general in our states, and back then, Beau would often tell me stories about his dad. He would talk about the kind of father and the kind of man that Joe Biden is. The qualities that Beau revered in his father are the same qualities that I have seen every day in our president. His honesty, his integrity, his commitment to his faith and his family, his big heart, and his love, deep love of our country. And I am firsthand witness that every day our President Joe Biden fights for the American people, and we are deeply, deeply grateful for his service to our nation.
Meanwhile, leading members of the Democratic Party are rallying behind Harris's bid to win the party's nomination. Veteran Democrat and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has given Harris her endorsement, and Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who had been tipped to throw her hat into the ring, is also supporting the Harris campaign.
Kamala Harris has already made history once by being the first female and the first black vice president of the United States. She was in no hurry to get rid of Biden, initially holding the line for him after his disastrous debate performance.
We believe in our President Joe Biden, and we believe in what he stands for.
But soon after this, others began to push for her to replace him if he stepped aside. It's a scenario few would have predicted just a couple of years ago. The start of her vice presidency was overshadowed by criticism. Some said Harris was failing to make the most of her role and was being ineffective. However, supporters claimed she was being sidelined and held to a higher standard because she was a woman and black. Yet perhaps unsurprisingly, for one who managed to become the Vice President of the US, she's not a person to back down.
There are going to be many times in your life where you're going to be told that can't be done. It's never been done before. It's not time. They're not ready for it. And then this is the one I love. It's going to be a lot of hard work. Don't you listen. I eat no for breakfast.
Some other factors are also working in her favour. She's already on the ticket and as such would automatically inherit the infrastructure and funds of Biden's campaign, worth tens of millions of dollars. She also has the highest name recognition of all the alternatives and is already a player on the global stage. She has become a leading voice on abortion rights, one of the key issues of the campaign, and has prioritised finding solutions for the migration crisis at the US's southern border. But most crucially of all, perhaps, in the weeks after the debate, betting companies showed Harris had a greater chance than Biden of winning the election.
Straight to our Washington bureau chief, Ines Paul. Welcome, Ines. So as the Harris campaign picks up momentum and support, is this providing the Democratic campaign with a new energy or just more chaos?
No, definitely more energy, Phil. We just heard that really major big names are rallying behind Kamala Harris. Biden, of course, the president, the Clintons came out yesterday, but today, just right now, Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House, also endorsed her, and that is huge. She is known to be a king, or maybe in this case, a queen maker. And what is also interesting, that some of her potential rivals, like Californian's Gavin Newsom, also rallied behind her. So she gets a lot of support from people and a lot of money. More than $150 million were collected in these big super PACs and other groups within the last 24 hours. So definitely a change in the mood, at least in the Democratic part of this country, and a totally new energy in this whole election campaign.
So does this mean that Kamala Harris is certain to get the nomination, or will there be some sort of competition at the convention?
Yeah, that is the big question, right? The convention takes place in 3 weeks or so in Chicago. Some well-known voices ask for an open convention, saying that that would be the only kind of genuinely democratic process to pick the candidate, as Kamala Harris has been not on the ballot during the primaries, of course. We shall see. We have to keep in mind it has been more than half a century since the Democrats choose a nominee through an open convention, and it's really very unknown, and nobody really is sure if they can really put up the process to do so within the next 3 weeks.
And so how does this change affect the Trump campaign? They've been focusing on Joe Biden. Now they have to gear up to face a potential new opponent.
Right. I was in Milwaukee last week to cover the Republican National Convention, and so I witnessed it really first eyes, how the whole campaign was focusing on Biden's weakness. They showed video clips with him falling down the stairs and mumbling, stumbling, and also many of the delegates we talked to, of course, were focusing not so much on Biden's politics, but on him being not able to hold this office anymore. So yes, indeed, the Republicans need to shift their narrative, so to speak. What they will do, and already are doing, of course, saying that Kamala Harris kind of co-owns the policy of President Biden and is also responsible for his failures, such as the migration, the border issue, or also the inflation and economical issues here in the country. So that's what they're going to put out. And then they also will argue legally, saying that these 14 million Americans or so who voted for Biden have no say anymore. So many things we have to cover for the next couple of days and weeks.
OK. Thanks for now. DW's Washington Bureau Chief, Ines Poll. Well, the race to win the Democrats' nomination was sparked by President Biden's decision not to seek a second term. That move turned the election campaign upside down and caused Republicans to focus their attacks on Harris.
After weeks of speculation and denials, U.S. President Joe Biden has abandoned his bid for re-election in November. In a statement, Biden said, "I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." The catalyst was his debate against Donald Trump. Biden struggled to keep his train of thought, and his performance fueled concerns about his age and cognitive state.
If we finally beat Medicare,
Biden has now endorsed his Vice President Kamala Harris as the challenger to Donald Trump. But Americans are divided on his choice.
Awful news. Joe Biden got 14 million votes. He should be the candidate.
She's a woman, but also maybe she'll make change for us for once. That's what we need, a lot of change. We need definitely some peace too.
I don't see where they have really much a chance. I think it's over for. It's a party that is deconstructing. It is failing, and I think the whole world is witnessing that right now.
Donald Trump reacted to the news, saying, Crooked Joe Biden was not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve, and he never was. He only attained the position of president by lies, fake news, and not leaving his basement. All those around him, including his doctor and the media, knew that he wasn't capable of being president, and he wasn't. In 2020, Harris failed in her bid to become the Democratic nominee. Now she is closer than ever. It all depends on how delegates vote at the Democratic convention in August.
You have an impeccable memory.
Many notable Democrats have already endorsed Harris, a former prosecutor and attorney general. But some of the party's top brass have not backed her. Critics say Harris lacks a clear vision and has been absent on the political stage. Biden's late withdrawal has upended the Democratic campaign. The party must quickly find its footing with just months until the election.
Let's pick over some of this with Dr. Andra Gillespie, who is an associate professor of political science at Emory University. She joins us from Washington. Welcome back to DW. What do you think changed Joe Biden's minds after so many weeks of resistance?
I think it was the accumulation of people calling for him to drop out of the race. It didn't stop, and in fact, it was reaching a crescendo. That, coupled with the fact that major Democratic donors started to threaten withholding funds from not only his presidential campaign, but also from down-ballot House and Senate races, I think ended up pushing Joe Biden to the point where he realized that he couldn't sustain a campaign and that it would probably be best for him to drop out.
And how do you think this is going to be received by voters? Because for weeks, the Democratic Party told everyone Joe Biden is the best we have. Now suddenly he's not. Will this damage Democratic prospects?
That in and of itself won't damage his prospects. There were lots of public opinion polls pointed to the fact that lots of people had questions about Joe Biden's age. And I think core Democratic voters are going to support the Democratic nominee, whoever that is. The hope by switching candidates out is that people will be less concerned about the Democratic candidate's physical and mental fitness for office. And they're hoping that this actually then shines a spotlight on the issues that Democrats want to tout as the reasons why they should control the White House as opposed to Donald Trump and the Republicans. Now, that being said, Joe Biden was struggling to craft a resonant message for voters that touted the highlights of his record. And so Kamala Harris now is going to have to do a better job than Joe Biden did of crafting that message and making the case for why Democrats should hold on to the White House for another 4 years. And she's got to do so holding the same record that Joe Biden had. So she isn't quite presenting herself as change in the way that, say, Barack Obama was able to do in 2008. She is change in that she is a different, younger, more energetic candidate. But she is still sort of, she is still going to have the incumbent party's record. And she's going to have to defend that. And
so are the Democrats best to effectively give this position to Kamala Harris, or would it be better for them to have a competition?
Well, I mean, she will be duly voted in as the nominee. So the delegates who have already been chosen for the convention are going to have votes. So there will be some sort of small d democratic process. I think it becomes a question of whether or not there are other people who choose to participate in an open contested primary. From what we've seen happen in the last 24 hours, it looks like Harris is consolidating support around her. So it seems with each passing day increasingly less likely that she's going to see a serious challenger so that we would have a type of open contested primary that might lead to multiple ballots and some perceived level of chaos. So I think what we've seen happen is that she has reached out to Democratic Party stalwarts and elites. She's gathering endorsements. She's not done with them yet. We'll see if anybody else puts their hat in the ring, but I think it is highly unlikely that she will get a strong challenge from somebody else within her party.
OK. You've talked about her youth and the energy that she brings to this campaign. Which voters do Democrats lose with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket?
Well, I mean, she's still going after the same voters that Joe Biden was going after. There were concerns about a lack of enthusiasm amongst core Democratic voters that could actually end up hurting Joe Biden. So, in particular, could you lose enough of these voters in battleground states such that Biden would end up losing the Electoral College? So, the base of the Democratic Party are African American voters, particularly African American women. And there isn't much room to grow within that constituency that votes upwards of 90% Democratic, but this might be the type of thing that would energize them. I think the hope is that she might be able to do a better job of energizing young voters, that she's made enough inroads and has enough support amongst progressives that she might be able to keep them in the Democratic fold. And with a message that focuses on reproductive rights, that might be something that would resonate with women, particularly young women or suburban women as well. So I think the question then becomes, does Kamala Harris resonate with some of the voters that Democrats would try to reach in the middle? So Democrats have long lost working class white voters. Would she do a better job than Joe Biden of actually being able to reach out to them? One of my colleagues just said on another program that that's probably unlikely. But I think the question is, does she excite the base enough that she can offset potential losses for voters who are not guaranteed to vote Democratic with voters who have a much higher probability of voting Democratic?
Thank you for guiding us through that so clearly. Political scientist Dr. Andrew Gillespie from Emory University. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now let's get a view on what all this means for transatlantic relations, and by bringing in Rachel Rizzo, a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, for more. Welcome. So now that Biden has said he's not running, he's instead focusing his remaining 6 months in office on what he will do there. How much do you think that is going to affect how strong of a partner he will be for transatlantic allies?
Well, I think that the message that Biden sent both during his campaign and during his presidency was that America is back, that after 4 years of uncertainty and mercurialness under Trump's presidency, that America could be seen again as a reliable ally and partner. And that's certainly what he's been trying to message to the Europeans for the last 4 years, with his ardent support of both NATO, the European Union, certainly the war in Ukraine. And so I think with his remaining time in office, those are the things, that's his legacy that I think in terms of foreign policy, he's going to work on solidifying before he passes the torch come January of next year.
So tell us a little bit more about exactly what transatlantic partners are hoping to see now from a Democratic campaign in the United States.
Well, we've sort of gotten into this weird dynamic, I think, in Europe, where the Democratic Party is sort of seen as the saviors of the transatlantic alliance, the champions of the transatlantic alliance, whereas the Republicans are sometimes seen as the potential death knell of it. Certainly, Trump and his team have been much harsher on NATO, calling Europeans free riders, calling the European Union a project meant to undermine the United States. They've been much harsher on Europe than the Democrats have. So I would really like to see us get out of this dynamic. And I'd actually like to see Kamala Harris, if she ends up being the nominee, and her vice president, take a tough line on Europe, not maybe go as far as Trump has gone, but say, America is back, but Europe does need to pull more of its weight, does need to figure out how to spend more on defense and shoulder more of the burden of its own continental security, because that's, I think, where we're headed in the future as the United States continues this pivot to the Indo-Pacific region. So I think Europeans are expecting sort of a lighter touch from the Democrats, and they could expect that. But I would like Kamala Harris, or again, whoever the nominee is, to come out perhaps a little bit tougher than Biden has over the last few years.
How likely do you think that is to happen? That's surely not what transatlantic allies would actually like to see.
Well, I actually think it could happen, because we've seen this dynamic in the U.S. where the Republicans have sort of cornered the market on this messaging. But Biden has tried over the last few months, I think, to increase Kamala Harris's profile in Europe. She has replaced him at the Munich Security Conference, both in 2023 and 2022, and sent a message of unity, but also sent a message of, you know, the need to increase defense spending and some of the issues that I mentioned before. So again, I don't think the Democrats are going to go full Republican on this messaging, but Kamala Harris, as someone who is not a foreign policy person herself, takes a lot of her cues from her advisors and people who have been in this game for a long time. So let's see the kind of guidance they give her and where this might go over the next few months. But again, we'll have to wait and see. A lot of things are up in the air at the moment.
Indeed. What about the war in Ukraine? What do you think we would expect to see from a potential Harris administration? A continuation of backing for Ukraine's war effort in the same way we've seen under Biden?
I think we'll see more continuity than change on that front. The problem really isn't with the White House. The problem is the difficulty that the White House has getting potential aid passed on Capitol Hill. The war in Ukraine has turned into a highly partisan issue. We saw that that issue discussed a lot at the Republican National Convention last week. J.D. Vance has been very vocal about his desire to end U.S. support for Ukraine. So I think as a counter to that, we'll see Kamala Harris or whoever the nominee is be very pro-Ukraine in the same way that Joe Biden has been during his presidency. But again, it is going to be difficult no matter who wins this election, especially if it's a Democrat, given the partisanship surrounding Ukraine that has developed on Capitol Hill.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today with your insights. That is Rachel Rizzo with the Atlantic Council.